There is a strange moment that happens before people admit they are in financial trouble. It is not the first missed payment. It is not the first collection call. It is not the first time the card gets declined. It happens much earlier. It happens when you open your banking app, see your paycheck arrive, and feel nothing. Not excitement, not relief, not progress, just calculation. Because before you even touch that money, your mind is already dividing it. This part goes to the credit card. This part goes to the loan. This part goes to the payment plan. This part goes to the balance you promised yourself you would fix last month. This part disappears into interest. This part keeps the account alive, but does not really move you forward. And then, after all of that, you look at what is left. That is the moment, the quiet moment when you realize you are not really being paid. You are being passed through. Money enters your account, but it already belongs to decisions that happened before today. That is what debt does when it becomes normal. It does not only take money from you. It gets in line before you do. It becomes the first person paid from your labor. Before your savings, before your future, before your peace, before your choices, debt stands there with its hand out. And if you are not careful, your entire financial life becomes a system where you work in the present to keep feeding the past. That is the real problem. Most people think debt is a number, a balance, a statement, a minimum payment, a bad month, a mistake. But debt, when it stays long enough, becomes a silent transfer of ownership. Your future income starts belonging to yesterday. Your next paycheck starts paying for an older version of you. Your next month starts carrying the weight of a decision that felt small when you made it. And that is why getting out of debt is not just about paying money back. It is about taking back the first claim on your own life. Because as long as debt is paid before your future is paid, you are not building. You are servicing. You are maintaining. You are keeping something alive that should be shrinking. And the brutal part is that you can look responsible while doing it. You can pay every month and still be trapped. You can make the minimum payment and still be losing. You can have a decent income and still feel poor. You can work hard and still have no margin. That is what makes consumer debt so dangerous. It can hide inside a normal life. It does not always look like disaster. Sometimes it looks like a person with a job, a phone, a car, a social life, and a private panic every time the statement closes. Sometimes it looks like someone who says, "I'm handling it," because technically they are still paying. But paying is not the same as escaping. That sentence matters. Paying is not the same as escaping. There are payments that move you toward freedom, and there are payments that simply buy permission to stay trapped for another month. The minimum payment is often exactly that, a permission fee, a way to avoid immediate collapse, a way to keep the account from exploding today, a way to calm the panic just enough that you do not change the system. And yes, sometimes a minimum payment is necessary. If you are in a crisis, if cash is tight, if you are trying to avoid worse damage, the minimum payment can be a temporary shield. But it is not a life plan. It is not a strategy. It is not freedom. It is a pause button with interest attached. And many people spend years pressing that button. But they pay. They breathe. They use the card again. But they pay. They promise this month will be different. They use the card again. They blame themselves. They avoid looking. They pay the minimum. They feel slightly better. Then the balance appears again, barely changed. That cycle is not just financial. It is psychological. It trains you to survive instead of escape. It teaches you to treat temporary relief as progress. And that is why so many people feel confused. They say, "I keep paying, so why am I still stuck?" Because not every payment is a plan. Some payments are just maintenance. Some payments are just rent paid to a problem. Some payments are just the cost of not changing yet. And that is the uncomfortable truth about debt. The balance is not the only thing you have to pay off. You also have to pay off the behavior that created the balance. You have to pay off the illusion that available credit is available life. You have to pay off the habit of rescuing your present by robbing your future. You have to pay off the version of you that says, "I'll deal with it later," without asking who later is, because later is not a place. Later is you, tired, older, still working, still trying to breathe, still needing groceries, rent, gas, medicine, repairs, rest, and dignity. When you push a cost into the future, you are not sending it into empty space. You are sending it to another version of yourself. And that version of you deserves some protection. This is where debt becomes more than math. It becomes a moral question you ask yourself privately. How much pressure am I willing to place on the person I am becoming? How many future hours am I willing to sell for a purchase I barely remember? How many months of stress am I willing to accept for a moment of relief? And before anyone misunderstands this, the point is not shame. Shame is useless if it does not produce clarity. The point is honesty, because people fall into debt for many different reasons. Some debt comes from emergencies. Some debt comes from medical bills. Some debt comes from losing income. Some debt comes from trying to help family. Some debt comes from bad timing. Some debt comes from lack of financial education. Some debt comes from emotional spending. Some debt comes from wanting to look stable before you actually are. Some debt comes from building a lifestyle with no space for bad luck. And that last one is more common than people want to admit. A lot of financial pain does not begin with one dramatic purchase. It begins with a monthly life that has no room. No room for surprise. No room for mistakes. No room for repairs. No room for delay. No room for illness. No room for a bad week. No room for being human. When your life has no room, credit becomes the room. And that is the trap. The card becomes your emergency fund. The loan becomes your margin. The payment plan becomes your way to keep normal life moving. And at first, it feels helpful. It feels like flexibility. It feels like access. It feels like you found breathing space. But if the underlying life does not change, credit does not give you breathing space. It gives you rented oxygen. And rented oxygen gets expensive. That is why the first step is not motivation. It is diagnosis. You need to know what kind of debt you have. Because if you treat all debt the same, you may choose the wrong solution. Debt created by emergency requires protection. Debt created by overspending requires limits. Debt created by low income requires income growth. Debt created by social pressure requires courage. Debt created by emotional pain requires awareness. Debt created by disorganization requires structure. Debt created by optimism requires realism. Debt created by helping others requires boundaries. Debt created by lifestyle inflation requires a lower burn rate. The balance may look the same on paper, but the route is different. And if the route is different, the strategy has to be different. If your debt came from a one-time crisis, the goal is to pay it down and build a buffer so the next crisis does not send you back. If your debt came from spending more than you earn every month, paying it off without changing your monthly life is just a temporary cleanup. If your debt came from status, you need to stop financing an image that does not protect you when the bill arrives. If your debt came from stress, loneliness, boredom, or emotional exhaustion, you need to stop using purchases as emotional medication. Because financial advice that ignores the emotional source of debt is incomplete. And emotional explanations that ignore the math are also incomplete. You need both. You need numbers and honesty. You need a spreadsheet and a mirror. One tells you how much you owe. The other tells you why the balance keeps coming back. Most people only want one of those. The numbers people want the spreadsheet. The emotional people want the story. But debt is often built by both, so the escape has to use both. Now, before you choose any payoff method, there is one thing you must do. You have to stop the debt from growing. That sounds obvious, but it is where many people fail. They start making bigger payments while still using the same credit card for daily life. So the balance goes down, then back up, down, then back up. They feel like they are fighting. But they are fighting while feeding the thing they want to kill. You cannot drain a bathtub while the faucet is still open and then call the water stubborn. At some point, the faucet has to close. That does not mean credit is evil. Credit is a tool, but a tool can become dangerous when your relationship with it is broken. If you are carrying consumer debt and you keep using the card because you need it, that is not normal convenience anymore. That is dependency, and dependency needs interruption. Remove the card from your wallet. Remove it from shopping apps. Remove saved payment details. Stop using credit for food, small comforts, impulse purchases, online shopping, and emotional rescue. If you need one emergency option, create strict rules around it. But do not pretend you are paying off debt while using the same debt to keep the month alive. That is not a plan. That is a loop. Once the bleeding stops, you need the full map. Not a vague idea. Not, I owe around this much. Not, it's probably fine. Not, I don't want to look. You need the real numbers. Every debt, every balance, every interest rate, every minimum payment, every due date, every promotion, every personal loan, every informal debt, every forgotten account, every obligation that quietly takes part of your future income. Write it down. Name it. Put it in one place. This moment may feel ugly. Good. It is supposed to break the fog. Fog protects the debt. Clarity protects you. A hidden debt feels infinite. A written debt becomes a target, and even if the number is painful, it is still better than the anxiety of not knowing. Because your mind will often make the unknown larger than reality. Not always. Sometimes the number really is bad. But even then, bad and visible is better than bad and invisible. You cannot attack a blur. You need shape. Once the shape is clear, you choose the attack. This is where people usually talk about the debt snowball and the debt avalanche, but I want to frame them differently. The avalanche method is a war against cost. You attack the debt with the highest interest rate first. You pay minimums on the others. You send every extra dollar to the most expensive debt. This is often the strongest mathematical choice because it reduces the total interest you pay. If one debt is burning hotter than the others, you put water there first. The snowball method is a war against discouragement. You attack the smallest balance first, not because it is always the most efficient, but because eliminating a debt gives you a win. And wins matter when you have been feeling defeated. If someone has 5 balances, 7 payment dates, 3 cards, and constant stress, closing one account can create real psychological momentum. That matters, because a plan you abandon is not superior just because it looked better in a calculator. The avalanche respects math. The snowball respects human behavior. The right choice depends on what is most likely to keep you moving. If you are disciplined, calm, and able to stay committed even when progress feels slow, the avalanche may be better. If you are overwhelmed, ashamed, scattered, and need proof that this is working, the snowball may be better. And sometimes the smartest strategy is a hybrid. Close one small debt to reduce noise, then attack the highest interest rate. Or attack the highest rate for a while, then clean up small balances. The point is not to worship a method. The point is to escape. Financial advice often fails because it treats people like machines. But people are not machines. People get tired. People panic. People compare themselves to friends. People buy things when they feel invisible. People avoid numbers when numbers feel like judgment. People sabotage themselves after small wins. People make promises on Monday and break them on Friday night. So your debt plan must be designed for the person you actually are, not the person you imagine you will become after watching one motivational video. That is a hard sentence, but it is useful. Designed for your real behavior, not your fantasy behavior. If you know you spend when money sits in your account, automate payments right after payday. If you know you impulse buy at night, remove saved cards. If you know social invitations break your budget, decide your answer before the invitation comes. If you know you avoid statements, schedule a weekly check-in. If you know you get discouraged, track visible progress. If you know you overspend after feeling deprived, build a small controlled allowance into the plan. A plan that ignores your weak moments is not serious. It is decoration. Now let us talk about the monthly attack amount. This is where vague intentions die. I'll pay whatever I can is not a plan. It sounds mature, but it is too soft. Debt needs a number. You need to decide how much money every month will go toward the target debt beyond the minimums. That number should be aggressive enough to matter and realistic enough to repeat. Too low and the debt barely moves. Too high and you will break the plan, resent it, and bounce back into spending. The goal is not financial self-torture. The goal is sustained pressure. Debt hates sustained pressure. One heroic payment helps, but repeated payments change everything. Because the first payments feel slow. Then one debt closes. Then the payment from that debt rolls into the next. Then interest gets smaller. Then more of your payment hits principal. Then the balance starts falling faster. Momentum appears late. But it appears. The problem is that many people quit before momentum arrives. They expect the first month to feel transformational. It usually does not. The first month feels like discipline. The second month feels like inconvenience. The third month feels like boredom. And then, if you keep going, something changes. The balance moves enough to be visible. You close something. You feel less afraid. You start believing the plan, not because someone inspired you, because the evidence is on the page. That is why tracking matters. You need to see the debt shrinking. Not obsessively, not every hour, but consistently. Once a week is enough for many people. Open the tracker. Update balances. Look for leaks. Check your next payment. Notice progress. Small progress counts, because small progress repeated becomes freedom. And if that sounds too simple, good. Most financial recovery is simple. It is just not easy. There is a difference. Simple means the logic is clear. Not easy means your emotions will resist it. The logic is simple. Spend less than you earn. Stop adding new consumer debt. Pay minimums to protect accounts. Attack one debt with extra money. Reduce interest when possible. Build a small emergency buffer. Increase income if needed. Avoid relapse. Repeat. That is not complicated, but living it is hard because you are not fighting numbers alone. You are fighting habits, and fatigue, and identity, and social pressure, and boredom, and shame, and the desire to feel normal. That is why the next part matters. You need a social strategy. Because debt payoff does not happen in silence. It happens while other people keep spending. Your friends will still invite you out. Your family may still expect you to participate. Coworkers will still order food. People online will still show vacations, clothes, cars, restaurants, upgrades, and a version of life that looks effortless. And if you do not have a prepared response, you will pay to avoid discomfort. This is one of the most expensive habits people have. Not luxury, not coffee, not subscriptions. The inability to say, "Not right now." Those 3 words can save thousands. Not right now. I am focusing on something. I am not putting that on a card. I am keeping this month simple. I am rebuilding my finances. I will pass this time. You do not need to confess everything. You do not need to explain your whole situation. You do not need to ask permission to protect your future. Because the people who pressure you to spend will not make your payments. They will share the moment, not the consequences. They will enjoy the dinner, not the interest. They will like the trip, not the statement. They will laugh with you when the money is spent, but they will not sit with you when the anxiety comes back. That does not make them evil. It just means the responsibility is yours. And if the responsibility is yours, the boundary has to be yours too. This is where debt payoff becomes a maturity test. Can you tolerate looking less successful for a while so you can become more stable later? Can you let other people spend without following them? Can you say no without turning it into a drama? Can you stop financing an image that does not pay dividends? Because a financed image is not confidence. It is pressure wearing nice clothes. And many people are not drowning because they bought one giant thing. They are drowning because they bought proof. Proof that they were okay. Proof that they belonged. Proof that they were not behind. Proof that they could still participate. Proof that their life was not as tight as it felt. But proof purchased with debt becomes evidence against your peace. You do not need to prove you are fine by becoming less free. You need to become fine. That is different. And becoming fine often looks boring from the outside. It looks like staying home, cooking, reviewing statements, selling things you do not use, working extra hours for a season, driving the same car, skipping upgrades, ignoring offers, deleting apps, paying before spending, choosing quiet progress over visible consumption. It does not look exciting, but it changes your life. Because every boring financial decision is a vote for a future where your paycheck is not already spoken for. That future is worth more than applause. Now let us talk about increasing income. Because there is a limit to cutting expenses. Some people absolutely have spending leaks. They can free up money by canceling unused subscriptions, reducing impulse purchases, planning meals, renegotiating services, selling unused items, or lowering unnecessary lifestyle costs. That money matters. Do not dismiss it. $100 redirected every month is not just $100. It is a message to the system that waste is no longer in charge. But for some people, cutting is not enough. Their income is too low relative to obligations. Their margin is too thin. Their debt is too expensive. Their life is already basic. In that case, telling them to simply spend less becomes lazy advice. They need more income, not as motivational decoration, as financial oxygen. Over time, freelance work, selling unused items, a second temporary income stream, negotiating pay, taking skills seriously, offering services, reducing idle hours for a season. Not forever, but long enough to change the math. However, there is a warning. More income does not save a person who has no system. More income without discipline simply funds a more expensive version of the same chaos. You can earn more and still be broke. You can earn more and still carry balances. You can earn more and still have no savings. You can earn more and still live paycheck to paycheck. Income is power only when it has direction. Without direction, it becomes bigger leakage. So before extra money arrives, decide where it goes. If you get a bonus, where does it go? If you sell something, where does it go? If you pick up extra work, where does it go? If you get a raise, where does it go? If you do not decide in advance, the money will be absorbed. Life expands quickly into unassigned money. That is why debt payoff requires assignment. Every extra dollar needs a job. Some dollars protect survival. Some dollars attack debt. Some dollars build a tiny emergency buffer. Some dollars prevent emotional rebellion by giving you a controlled, guilt-free amount to use. But no dollar should wander around without purpose when you are trying to escape. Unassigned money has a way of becoming forgotten spending, and forgotten spending becomes future regret. Now, what about negotiation? This is where people need to be careful. Calling a lender, asking for a lower interest rate, exploring a hardship plan, moving a balance, consolidating debt, or restructuring payments can help in some situations. But those tools are not freedom by themselves. They are tools, and a tool used without behavior change can make the problem worse. For example, someone takes a personal loan to pay off credit cards. The cards go to zero. The person feels relief, but because they never changed the spending pattern, they start using the cards again. Now they have the loan and new card balances. They did not escape. They multiplied the trap. This is extremely common, because a clean balance can create the illusion of a clean life. But if the system is still broken, the clean balance is temporary. Consolidation should not mean, now I can breathe and keep living the same way. It should mean, now I have one structured path out, and I will not reopen the doors behind me. Lower interest can help. A fixed payment plan can help. A balance transfer can help. A refinance can help. But only if it reduces cost, clarifies the path, and comes with strict prevention. Otherwise, you are just moving the problem to a nicer room. And a nicer room is still a trap if the door locks behind you. This is why financial maturity is not about knowing every product. It is about knowing what problem you are actually solving. Are you reducing interest? Are you simplifying payments? Are you avoiding default? Are you buying time responsibly? Are you creating a payoff path? Or are you just trying to feel less afraid for a few weeks? Be honest. Because the same financial move can be wise or foolish, depending on why you use it. A balance transfer used by a disciplined person with a payoff plan can save money. The same balance transfer used by someone who keeps spending can become another layer of debt. A loan used to consolidate and close the loop can help. The same loan used to create temporary relief can become a disaster. The product is not the whole answer. The person using it matters. That is why no debt strategy works without a relapse plan. You have to assume temptation will return. Because it will. The day your balance drops, temptation returns. The day one card is paid off, temptation returns. The day you feel proud, temptation returns. The day life gets stressful, temptation returns. The day you get extra money, temptation returns. The day you feel deprived, temptation returns. So do not wait until temptation arrives to invent a rule. Create the rule now. No consumer purchases on credit unless the full balance can be paid by the due date. No impulse purchases above a defined amount without a waiting period. No new monthly payment unless it fits inside the plan without touching savings or debt payoff. No using freed-up credit as available money. No increasing lifestyle until high-interest debt is gone. No financial decisions made while angry, lonely, exhausted, or trying to impress someone. Those rules may sound strict, but they are not punishment. They are protection. Freedom requires protection. A person trying to quit a destructive pattern cannot leave every door open and then act surprised when they walk back through one. Close doors? Not because you are weak, because you are serious. And once you start closing doors, something uncomfortable happens. You realize how much of your financial life was depending on open doors you should not have been using. The card for emergencies. The card for groceries. The card for the weekend. The card for the month when things got tight. The card for the moment when you did not want to say no. The card for the feeling that you still had options. But a credit card is not a real option if using it makes your next month worse. That is the difference. A real option gives you more freedom. A fake option gives you relief now and less freedom later. Debt often disguises itself as an option. That is why it feels so helpful at the beginning. It says, you can still go. You can still buy it. You can still handle this. You can still look normal. You can still postpone the discomfort. But postponing discomfort is not the same as solving it. Sometimes it just adds interest to it. So if you want out, you need one small thing that many people ignore because it sounds too basic. A buffer, not a huge emergency fund at first. Not 6 months of expenses while your credit card is charging brutal interest. That may not be the right order. But you need something. A small defensive wall, enough to keep a minor surprise from becoming new debt. Because if you have zero buffer, every inconvenience becomes a financial emergency. A tire, a doctor visit, a repair, a late reimbursement, a forgotten bill, a broken phone. a small family situation. None of these things may be catastrophic by themselves, but without margin, they become a new balance. And that is how people get trapped. They make progress, then life happens. They pay down the card, then an expense appears. They promise not to use credit again, then something breaks. They feel like the universe is against them. But sometimes the real issue is that the plan had no shock absorber. A small buffer is not there to make you feel rich. It is there to protect the plan. It is a wall between inconvenience and relapse. And that wall may be small at first, but even small walls matter when you have been living with no protection. This is where many people get the order wrong. They think, I will build an emergency fund after the debt is gone. But if there is no emergency fund at all, the debt may never stay gone long enough. So the strategy may be balanced. Pay aggressively toward high-interest debt, but also build a small starter buffer, enough to stop the bleeding when life throws something minor at you. Then, once the expensive debt is gone, you expand the buffer. You build real emergency savings. You start creating stability. You stop making credit your backup plan. That is a major psychological shift, because when credit is your backup plan, you are never really calm. You may feel covered, but deep down you know the coverage has a cost. It is not safety. It is borrowed safety. And borrowed safety becomes pressure. Real safety is having your own margin, even if it starts small. Now, there is another thing you have to understand. Debt repayment is not just a financial project. It is an identity project. At the beginning, you may see yourself as someone who is behind, someone who messed up, someone who owes, someone who cannot get organized, someone who is bad with money. Be careful with that story, because if you repeat it enough, you may start acting in agreement with it. The goal is not to pretend everything is fine. The goal is to choose a more useful identity. Not I am terrible with money, but I am becoming someone who faces numbers. Not I always ruin my finances. But I am building a system that makes ruin harder. Not I am trapped, but I am buying back my future one payment at a time. That language matters because behavior follows identity. A person who sees themselves as hopeless avoids. A person who sees themselves as rebuilding checks the numbers. A person who sees themselves as irresponsible gives up after one mistake. A person who sees themselves as learning adjusts the plan. Debt already takes enough from you. Do not let it take your identity too. You can admit the truth without making it your permanent name. You are not your balance. You are the person deciding what happens to that balance next. That distinction can carry you through the boring part. And there will be a boring part. Debt payoff is not always dramatic. Most of it is repetition. Update the tracker. Make the payment. Skip the unnecessary purchase. Cook at home. Work the extra shift. Say not right now. Transfer the bonus. Avoid the sale. Close the app. Check the balance. Do it again, and again, and again. It may not feel profound while you are doing it, but repetition is where financial identity is rebuilt. You do not become different because you made one intense decision. You become different because you keep making the same protective decision after the emotion fades. That is why the middle of the journey is the hardest. The beginning has fear. Fear can create urgency. The end has relief. Relief can create motivation. But the middle has boredom. And boredom is dangerous. Because boredom whispers, is this even working? Boredom says, you have been doing this for a while. Boredom says, maybe you can relax. Boredom says, one purchase will not matter. Boredom says, you deserve something. And maybe you do deserve something. But you also deserve not to restart the cycle. You deserve a future where your paycheck is not already cut into pieces. You deserve the quiet confidence of not needing credit for every surprise. You deserve to stop feeling panic when the statement closes. So when boredom appears, you need visible proof. That is why you track progress. Not because spreadsheets are exciting, because evidence keeps you from believing the wrong story. You need to see the balance drop. You need to see the interest shrink. You need to see one account close. You need to see your total debt number move. You need to see that the work is not disappearing. And when you close a debt, do not waste the freed payment. That is one of the most important moments. When one debt disappears, the money that used to go there should not automatically become lifestyle money. Not yet. That payment becomes a weapon. You roll it into the next debt, then the next, then the next. That is how momentum gets built, not through magic, through redirected pressure. The money was already leaving your life anyway. Now you make it leave with a mission. Eventually, something shifts. At first, the debt owned your payments. then your plan owns the payments. That is the transition. Same money leaving. Different master. Before, the payment kept you trapped. Now the payment cuts the chain. And when you understand that, payments feel different. They still hurt, but they mean something. That matters, because humans can tolerate sacrifice better when sacrifice has meaning. They cannot tolerate meaningless restriction for long, so give the process meaning. Every payment is not punishment. It is recovery. Every skipped impulse purchase is not deprivation. It is protection. Every no is not failure. It is a boundary. Every month of progress is not just financial improvement. It is evidence that you are no longer outsourcing your future to old habits. This is the deeper shift. You stop asking, "Can I afford the payment?" and start asking, "Do I want this thing to own part of my future?" That question is different because many things are technically affordable and still not worth the ownership they take. A monthly payment can fit and still make you fragile. A purchase can be possible and still be foolish. A lifestyle can look normal and still be too expensive for your reality. A debt can be manageable and still be blocking your freedom. That is why affordability is not the only standard. Freedom is a standard. Margin is a standard. Peace is a standard. Future flexibility is a standard. If a purchase destroys those, the price tag is lying. The real cost is higher. Now let us talk about the moment after the debt is gone. Because this is where people either transform or repeat. The last payment feels amazing. You look at the balance. Zero. For a moment, there is silence. The thing that was taking money from you every month is gone. The account is clean. The pressure is lower. You breathe differently. But that moment is dangerous because relief can turn into permission. You may think, now I can finally enjoy myself. And yes, you should enjoy the milestone, but be careful. The goal was not to get out of debt so you could immediately rebuild the same life that created it. The goal was to create a new financial operating system. If your old debt payment disappears, that money needs a new job. Emergency fund, savings, investing, career growth, business capital, future goals, health, stability, something that builds. Because if the money simply becomes untracked spending, you may feel richer without becoming stronger. That is how people return to debt. They free cash flow, then fill it with lifestyle. They eliminate pressure, then create new pressure. They pay off the past, then start financing the present again. Do not do that. The period right after debt payoff is one of the most powerful financial windows you will ever have, because you are already used to living without that money. You were sending it to debt. Now send it to your future. That is how debt repayment becomes wealth building. Not automatically, deliberately. You do not become financially free because the debt is gone. You become financially free when the money that used to serve debt begins to serve ownership. Ownership of savings, ownership of assets, ownership of choices, ownership of time, ownership of your next move. That is the real reason to escape. Not to have a prettier balance sheet. To have more choices. Debt reduces choices. Margin creates choices. Debt makes you tolerate things. Margin lets you walk away. Debt makes emergencies terrifying. Margin makes them manageable. Debt makes every paycheck feel temporary. Margin lets money stay long enough to build. Debt turns work into survival. Margin turns work into strategy. And if you have ever felt trapped in a job, a city, a relationship, a routine, or a version of life you no longer want, you already know how valuable choices are. Money is not everything, but lack of margin can make everything harder. It can make you stay where you should leave. It can make you accept less than you deserve. It can make you postpone decisions that matter. It can make you smaller, not because you lack talent, because your financial pressure is louder than your ambition. That is why paying off debt is not a small topic. It is not just a personal finance checklist. It is a return of mobility. It is the rebuilding of your ability to choose, and that is worth taking seriously. Now, there is one more uncomfortable issue. Some people are not ready to get out of debt because they are still emotionally attached to the lifestyle debt gives them. That sounds harsh, but look at it carefully. Debt may be painful, but it may also be protecting an identity. The identity of someone who can go out, someone who can buy nice things, someone who can keep up, someone who does not have to say no, someone who appears stable, someone who can avoid uncomfortable conversations, someone who does not have to admit limits. So when you remove debt, you are not only removing a payment method. You may be removing a mask. That can feel humiliating, but it can also be liberating because the mask was expensive and it was never actually protecting you. It was making your anxiety look presentable. Real confidence is not being able to finance anything. Real confidence is being able to say, that is not for me right now, without collapsing. Real confidence is not needing a purchase to prove you are okay. Real confidence is letting your private stability matter more than public appearance. That is a rare kind of strength. And yes, it may cost you some temporary discomfort. But discomfort is cheaper than interest. Remember that. Discomfort is cheaper than interest. Saying no is cheaper than paying for months. Waiting is cheaper than regret. Cooking is cheaper than financing a lifestyle. Looking boring is cheaper than pretending. A hard conversation is cheaper than a silent balance. These are not cute phrases. They are survival principles. Because every time you avoid discomfort with debt, discomfort comes back with a fee. So learn to tolerate the smaller pain. The pain of waiting. The pain of saying no. The pain of being honest. The pain of not buying. The pain of being temporarily less impressive. Those pains end faster. Debt pain renews monthly. Now, if your debt is serious, if there are legal issues, collections, default, lawsuits, or complex restructuring, get qualified help. This is important. A video can give perspective. It cannot replace personalized legal, financial, or credit advice. Rules differ by country, contract, bank, debt type, and stage of collection. Do not make high-stakes decisions based only on general content. But even then, the core principle remains. You need clarity. You need a plan. You need to stop making the problem bigger. You need to protect yourself from bad actors. You need to understand the consequences. And you need to take responsibility without drowning in shame. Responsibility is not self-hatred. Responsibility is the moment you stop waiting for the problem to respect you and start organizing against it. That is the tone you need. Not panic, not denial, not fantasy. Organized seriousness. Because organized seriousness beats emotional panic almost every time. Panic pays whatever screams loudest. Seriousness prioritizes. Panic avoids numbers. Seriousness writes them down. Panic makes random payments. Seriousness chooses a target. Panic promises. Seriousness automates. Panic waits for motivation. Seriousness builds rules. Panic says, I need to fix everything now. Seriousness says, I need to do the next correct thing repeatedly. That is how you win. Not all at once, repeatedly. And at some point, the repetition becomes identity. You become the kind of person who checks, the kind of person who plans, the kind of person who understands interest, the kind of person who does not confuse credit with income, the kind of person who can enjoy life without handing the bill to the future. That person is dangerous to debt, because debt depends on your inattention. It depends on fog. It depends on impulse. It depends on shame. It depends on you being too tired to look. When you become someone who looks, the debt loses one of its biggest advantages. So look at the number. Look at the pattern. Look at the moment you usually spend. Look at the emotion behind the purchase. Look at the people who make you spend. Look at the story you are trying to maintain. Look at the future version of yourself who keeps receiving the consequences. And then choose differently. Not perfectly, differently. You may make mistakes. You may have a bad month. You may slip. You may need to adjust. That does not mean the plan is dead. It means you are human. The real danger is not one imperfect month. The real danger is using imperfection as permission to quit. Do not turn a slip into a collapse. If you spend more than planned, return to the plan. If you miss a target, return to the plan. If you feel ashamed, return to the plan. If progress is slower than expected, return to the plan. The plan is not a fragile glass object. It is a path you can step off and step back on. But you have to step back on quickly. That is another mark of maturity. Not never falling, recovering faster. Financial recovery is often built by people who stop dramatizing every mistake and start correcting sooner. Now, let us bring this down to a clear sequence. First, stop adding new consumer debt. Second, list every debt clearly. Third, protect minimum payments so the situation does not worsen. Fourth, choose one target debt. Fifth, decide whether your first weapon is avalanche, snowball, or hybrid. Sixth, define a monthly attack amount. Seventh, automate what you can. Eighth, build a small starter buffer. Ninth, reduce leaks and assign every extra dollar. 10th, increase income if cutting is not enough. 11th, negotiate only if it improves the path and does not enable relapse. 12th, track weekly. 13th, roll freed payments into the next target. 14th, after payoff, redirect the old debt payment towards savings, investment, and stability. And above all, change the question. Stop asking only, how do I pay this off? Ask, what system made this normal, and how do I make sure it cannot quietly rebuild itself? That is the question that separates temporary relief from real change. Because anyone can get intense for a few weeks. Real change means your old pattern has fewer places to hide, fewer open doors, fewer excuses, fewer automatic charges, fewer emotional purchases, fewer social traps, fewer vague numbers, fewer future promises, more clarity, more rules, more margin, more honesty, more ownership. That is the game, not perfection. Ownership, taking back the first claim on your own labor. Taking back the money before interest gets it. Taking back the future before old habits spend it. Taking back the ability to say, this paycheck is not already gone. That sentence is powerful. This paycheck is not already gone. Imagine that. Imagine getting paid and not feeling hunted. Imagine seeing money land and not immediately slicing it into old obligations. Imagine having an emergency and not reaching for credit. Imagine saying no without panic. Imagine making a plan that is not destroyed by one repair. Imagine using extra income to build instead of patch. Imagine a month where your money moves toward your future, not your past. That is what you are buying when you pay off debt, not just a zero balance. A different relationship with time. Because debt makes the past expensive. Freedom makes the future available. And if you understand that, debt payoff stops feeling like a boring financial chore. It becomes a rescue mission. You are rescuing your next paycheck, your next decision, your next opportunity, your next year, your future attention, your future peace. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but anyone who has lived under financial pressure knows it is not dramatic. It is accurate. Debt can sit quietly in the background and still shape your life. It can decide where you live, what job you tolerate, what risks you avoid, what dreams you postpone, what conversations scare you, what emergencies break you. So when you attack debt, you are not just attacking a balance. You are attacking a force that has been narrowing your life. That is why it matters. And if you are listening to this while still carrying debt, do not use this as another reason to hate yourself. Use it as a reason to get precise. Shame is vague. Precision is useful. Shame says, I am a mess. Precision says, I owe this amount at this rate, and this is the first target. Shame says, I always fail. Precision says, I need a rule for Friday nights. Shame says, I cannot do this. Precision says, I need an extra $200 a month and a spending freeze on non-essentials for 90 days. Shame says, I'm behind. Precision says, I am starting here. That is how you move. From fog to numbers. From panic to structure. From guilt to action. From borrowed relief to earned freedom. And when you reach the end, when the debt is finally gone, do not forget what it taught you. Do not romanticize the struggle. Do not pretend it was good that it happened, but extract the lesson. Learn how quickly small decisions accumulate. Learn how expensive avoidance becomes. Learn how powerful margin is. Learn how dangerous it is to build a life that only works when nothing goes wrong. Learn how much peace costs and how much chaos charges. Then build differently. Build a life with room. Room for saving. Room for emergencies. Room for investments. Room for mistakes. Room for generosity that does not ruin you. Room for enjoyment that does not follow you for months. Room for choices. Because the goal is not to become someone who never spends. The goal is to become someone whose spending no longer betrays their future. That is the line. Spend, but do not betray your future. Enjoy, but do not sell your margin. Use credit if you are skilled enough to control it, but never confuse it with income. Help others, but not by destroying your own foundation. Celebrate, but not by reopening the chain. Live, but do not finance a version of life that leaves you privately afraid. That is not minimalism. That is self-respect. And maybe the most uncomfortable truth is this. Debt often ends when self-respect becomes stronger than impulse. When your future self becomes real to you. When peace becomes more attractive than appearance. When freedom becomes more valuable than immediate relief. When you finally decide that your paycheck should not arrive already owned by everyone except you. So the next time money enters your account, pause. Before the automatic spending, before the emotional purchase, before the minimum payment routine, before the thoughtless swipe, ask yourself one question. Who gets paid first from my life? The past? The bank? The impulse? The image? Or the future I say I want? Your answer is not in what you say. It is in where the money goes. And if you want your life to change, that answer has to change first. Because debt does not only ask for payments, it asks for priority. And the day you stop giving it the highest priority forever is the day your future starts coming back. One payment, one boundary, one honest number, one protected paycheck, one serious decision at a time. That is how you get out, not by becoming perfect, by becoming harder to fool. Harder for your impulses to fool, harder for offers to fool, harder for minimum payments to fool, harder for lifestyle pressure to fool, harder for your own excuses to fool. And if this made you uncomfortable, good. Useful financial truth often does. It does not flatter you. It gives you your power back. The final question is simple. When your next paycheck arrives, who will own it first? And what are you willing to change so that, little by little, the answer becomes you?